Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of the Sci-Fi Podcast. From Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Nick Zoutra. Today on the podcast, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Adina Roskies, the Helman Family Distinguished Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Cognitive Science Program at Dartmouth College. Adina received a PhD from the University of California, San Diego in both neuroscience and cognitive science in 1995, then a PhD from MIT in philosophy in 2004, and most recently, a Master of Studies in Law from Yale Law School in 2014. Prior to her work in philosophy, Adina held a postdoctoral fellowship in cognitive neuroimaging at Washington University and was senior editor of the neuroscience journal Neuron. Adina's philosophical research interests lie at the intersection of both philosophy and neuroscience, and include philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, and ethics. Adina was a member of the McDonald Project in Neurophilosophy and the MacArthur Law and Neuroscience Project. Her awards include the William James Prize and Stanton Prize, awarded by the Society of Philosophy and Psychology, a Mellon New Directions Fellowship, and the Lawrence S. Rockefeller Visiting Faculty Fellowship from the Princeton University Center for Human Values. She is a co-author of the book with Stephen Morse, A Primer on Criminal Law and Neuroscience. Thus, without further ado, let's bring in Adina. Adina Roskies, welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. How are you this morning?
Very well, thanks.
Great. So I'm calling you, and you are calling us from the Department of Philosophy at Dartmouth. Is that correct?
Yep.
Fantastic. So how has the semester gotten started over there yet?
Nope. No, we start later. We're on the quarter system.
Oh,
so we have
fun.
A couple weeks of craziness, actually, even though classes have not yet started.
Oh, really? Yeah. So what's it like going on right before the classes are in session?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, just, you said it's kind of crazy. I mean, is it just very busy getting prepared for teaching those courses? Is the department pretty active? I mean, I know what it's like prior to getting everything set up. I just wasn't sure, what it's like over there on the quarter system.
Well, it's a pretty intense term. And so, yeah, there's a lot of preparation ahead of time because there's not very much time to do things during the term. And we have a lot of advising. And a lot of summer workshops are still on. So every day seems to be a full day, even though officially we're not in session.
What kind of, I didn't realize about these summer workshops. What kinds of workshops?
This last week we had a workshop on networks in neuroscience.
Ooh.
Quite generally, and then we have a agency workshop tomorrow and the day after that through the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. So, and there was an ethics and epistemology workshop last weekend, and it's an active place.
It sounds quite active.
Yeah.
Well, great. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started as we usually do. I'm very excited to hear as our listeners will come to learn, Adina is a philosopher. Would you consider yourself a philosopher of cognitive neuroscience, a neuroscientist? How do you self-describe?
Oh boy, I guess most broadly as a cognitive scientist.
Okay,
and I guess more a philosopher of neuroscience and cognitive science, and cognitive neuroscientist. So.
Sure.
I don't think there's any single descriptor that I stick with.
No.
I jump around a lot.
Oh, and luckily cognitive science has that interdisciplinary bent to it that you can do a lot of things with it.
Right. I think if I say cognitive science, that leaves things wide open and allows me to do all kinds of stuff.
Yes. Okay, well, let's take a step back and start back from the beginning, Adina. Where did you grow up?
Grew up mostly in Pittsburgh, a little bit in New Haven, and then we moved to Pittsburgh. So most of my childhood was there.
Oh, and how do you like Pittsburgh?
Honestly, I did not.
Thank you for being honest.
Yeah, I didn't think that it had too many redeeming features, but other people tell me that it's a wonderful place to live and raise a family, and it certainly is a good place for cognitive science and philosophy and neuroscience. So I can't fault it on those fronts.
Well, I imagine as a young child, you weren't up to date on all of the cognitive science work done at Carnegie Mellon and things. It's
not really on the radar.
No, not quite. Okay. So, and you said you lived in New Haven for a bit?
I was born there, but we moved away when I was pretty young. Okay.
And what did your folks do?
My dad is a physicist.
Okay.
Or until recently taught for University of Pittsburgh. And my mom was a physical therapist and a hospital administrator, now a consultant on some medical issues. So, yeah.
Very nice.
Varied interests. But there was an academic family, so.
It sounds like it. So, I mean,
familiar with that world.
Did you have the experience of sort of growing up within the university culture?
I don't think I saw it that way, but I did. I knew that my dad taught at the university, and we would have parties where other faculty would come or graduate students would come. So that was pretty much my only contact. I don't actually recall going to things like, departmental retreats or anything like that we actually do here pretty frequently have parties or receptions where families are invited, but don't recall doing that sort of thing in Pittsburgh.
Okay. So, what kinds of things were interest of yours growing up?
Horses and
horses,
sports. Yeah,
sports.
Yeah. I was. Sorry,
I misheard that.
Horses.
Horses. Okay, I thought you said horses. Then I thought you said sports. So okay, horses.
And sports.
Horses and sports. Okay, so riding, doing that. Okay, very nice. Did you do some like equestrian training or?
Yeah, I would try to get jobs at horse camps in the summer, and then, work with horses, teach riding, take lessons, stuff like that.
Okay.
But I would say that was one of the most prominent childhood passions that I had.
Yeah, they're pretty fascinating. I had a stepsister who was very, very passionate about horses. Went with her sometimes to the trainings. It looks like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is.
Cool. So did you do that up through, early childhood, middle school, high school years?
I think I worked in horse camps. Once I was old enough, I pretty much did that till my mid-teens. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to ride very much during the year, so it was pretty much just relegated to summers. Mm-hmm. There weren't a lot of horses in Pittsburgh, and my parents weren't very keen on the whole idea. So
really, yeah. What was what was their perspective?
Oh, I don't know whether it was the cost or the danger or the driving distance. But yeah, it wasn't one of the things that they really promoted.
Sure.
But I did it while I could.
Sure. Was there something that they were promoting? I mean, were they, you said you mentioned you come from an academic family. Were academics what was promoted, or, what was that like?
Well, academics, of course, were important. It was clear to me that was a priority, but that wasn't something that they really had to work on. I mean,
Sure. It was sort of like a given kind of thing.
Yeah. But outside of academics, I don't know. I suppose I could say I was forced to play violin and go to Hebrew school.
Okay.
Neither of those things were things that I took to very, very strongly. And I got very interested in volleyball in high school, so I played on the volleyball team.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like you had a pretty diverse, active lifestyle early on with equestrian training and volleyball and whatnot.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say volleyball and skiing were sports I picked up in school and really enjoyed.
Oh, nice. Where did you go skiing?
Oh, world famous Seven Springs. I'm sure you've heard of it.
It's just one of those like very small mountains that.
It's just a very small mountain, but it actually calls itself world famous Seven Springs. So
okay.
I didn't know that it was a small mountain at the time.
Oh, I bet.
I thought I was going to some special place, and only after I left high school did I realize that nobody had ever heard of it.
That's fair. Okay. All right. Well, so you make your way, but I guess before we get into the undergrad life, so was philosophy ever on the radar? Early childhood, were there, any interests initially, either maybe not either in specific philosophical traditions or either kind of just like ways of thinking that drew you to it?
I wouldn't say so. The only thing that I can identify, there was no philosophy offered at my school, and I don't know that I even really knew much about it or thought that it was a thing one could do. But I had an English class in high school where we read Sartre and Camus and things like that, and I loved the existentialism stuff that we read, and that was my first introduction to philosophy, although I think at the time I thought it was literature.
Okay. Can you perhaps recall maybe one or two ideas that that first really excited you?
I'm not sure I can recall the ideas, but I think the sort of the existentialist worldview tends to resonate with adolescents, and certainly did with me.
Yep.
So that, I think it was that. I don't even recall whether we approached those texts in any way that would be identifiable as, philosophical.
Sure.
But in retrospect, looking back, once I was taking philosophy courses in college, I realized that what I loved about those particular things that we read in that class was that it was philosophy that I was reading.
Yeah. Very nice. Okay, so you make your way to Yale University.
Yes.
Undergraduate. How was that?
It was life-changing.
Okay.
It was wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. So describe. Yeah. Tell me about this.
I guess I felt like I was finally free. Maybe one of the reasons that I dislike Pittsburgh is because of the contrast with life in Pittsburgh, or maybe intellectual life in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I didn't really push you on that.
College years.
So maybe you could go on. How did life in as an undergraduate, as this freeing experience, change from, you could say, growing up in Pittsburgh?
Yeah. School became exciting and, fun, and the ideas, the professors were great. The ideas that I encountered and my classmates were really interesting and challenging, and all of a sudden, I don't know, I just found joy in the life of the mind as opposed to, I don't know that I thought high school was drudgery, but it was just, something I did. I happened to do it well, but I didn't
Sure.
feel excited by it. But at Yale, I just got very excited.
Great. Were there any? So was it at this time? I noticed that. So what kinds of coursework excited you?
Well, I actually had gone in thinking that I wanted to do astrophysics or cosmology, and I went in as a physics major, and actually found that physics excited me the least of the things that I was taking, and I also wasn't that good at it. I thought I was pretty good at it in high school, but in comparison with the people who really were good at it, I wasn't so good.
Yeah. So from your experience, and obviously you're daughter of a physicist, have a little bit more experience, but of course that I don't know specifically what your father did in terms of physics. Astrophysics could be very different. What is it? Well, I'm curious. Like, what is it that you found? What was it that was not so interesting about the field, and what does it take? You'd think to do it well.
I don't know that I would say that I didn't find the field interesting. I certainly did not find my professor interesting. So I signed up for the honors level physics for freshmen.
Okay.
And that was a class that on day one must have had about 35 students enrolled. Mm-hmm. And by day, like by the second week of course of classes, there were 8 people left.
Oh, wow.
And I was the only woman. And
oh, wow.
I felt like I had to keep going because I didn't want to, back
Sure.
off and not stand up for my gender. So
yeah.
I forced myself to continue, but this class was absolutely mind-numbingly bad. It was, first of all, at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning, about half mile or 3/4 of a mile walk away from the rest of campus. And there was no textbook. So there was just the lecture of the professor, who was, I think, in his 70s, and talked to the blackboard. And I remember just falling asleep over and over again, dropping my pencil consistently throughout the class. So I wasn't even able to take the notes that were the only resource for that class.
Yeah.
And then the problem sets were undoable for me. I mean, I really just, they were so hard. This class was incredibly hard, and there was no support. And I don't know. It was,
that's rough.
I thought a pedagogical nightmare. If I had had a good professor, perhaps I could have done work at that level. But
sure.
Yeah. So I got the worst grade I ever got in my life, and nonetheless, I persisted. Me and Elizabeth Warren.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just I kept at it. I did better the second term. It was a 2-term sequence, and I continued taking physics classes. But I actually think that they were harder for me because I didn't learn the basics that all the people who had taken the much better taught standard physics course had acquired in that first year. And I don't know. I think it just became apparent to me. Maybe it wouldn't have been. Maybe things would have gone differently if I had taken that other course, and maybe I would still be a physicist. But
sure.
But I just didn't enjoy doing the work, and I think I'm much more conceptual than mathematical.
Yeah,
and I could have continued on and been a physics major and graduated, and it would have been fine, but at the same time I was taking other courses that sounded interesting to me. So, I took an art history course, and I took a bunch of literature courses and philosophy course, and political theory and just, a drawing class, a photography class, and basically found that every single course I took, no matter what the topic was, I enjoyed more than the physics classes I was taking. And after a couple of years, I thought that became a salient fact that maybe I should pay attention to.
Good, yeah. I think that's a good indication.
Yeah.
All right, so I noticed here that you graduate from Yale in 1988. And then, so what happens after undergrad? What are you thinking in terms of, career-wise, life-wise?
Yeah, well, I think what really changed things was the last year and a half or so of college. So okay. I took a term off more for fun than because I needed to.
Sure.
But just wanted to see the world a little bit, and I had taken some art history and other things, and realized that there was this other major that was really attractive to me, but you needed to have a certain proficiency in a Romance language to be in that major. So I decided that I would take this term off and take the shortest possible language course, and see if I could get into that major. So I traveled around and I spent 6 weeks in Italy learning Italian, and discovered that I was actually very good at it, and which surprised me because the languages that I had tried to learn before, I did not feel like they came easily. But those were Hebrew and Russian, neither of them particularly easy languages.
Sure.
And anyway, I loved it. I fell in love with Italy. I loved speaking Italian, and I came back and I switched to the humanities major, which is sort of a arts and letters interdisciplinary major. And in that major, you took a variety of courses, including philosophy courses, and it was doing that I first realized that I really enjoyed philosophy. Mm-hmm. And then kind of in parallel, I read a book the summer before my senior year that really, I think, set me on the path I've been on, and that was Doug Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
what was it about? This book is, it's won many awards.
Yeah.
So it is his claim to fame. He's actually at IU now. He's at Indiana.
Yeah.
Or, he's been there for quite a while, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't think he's teaching anymore, but he's...
Well, he'll actually teach. He'll every once a year or every other year, he'll teach some very eclectic course on all kinds of things, kind of like whatever is of interest. But what was it about this book that really challenged you or stimulated you?
I think it was the way it wove together ideas in many disciplines and really focused on cognition in some sense. And anyway, that's what I took away from it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And so I came back after that term, or after that summer, and signed up for, pretty much took all my electives in that vein. So I signed up for a neuroscience course and a senior seminar for which I had none of the prerequisites, and a course in the computer science department that was sort of an AI class, and just started immersing myself in what is cognitive science, and loved it. And I think that was really what framed the way I was going to approach the rest of my academic life. So
fantastic. And since then, just to move us along here in the interest of time, you went, what appears to, the hub of cognitive science at the time, University of California at San Diego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Who were you?
So
yeah.
In that class, the senior seminar for which I was not qualified, we read Pat Churchland's Neurophilosophy that had just come out, I think that year or the year before. And I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yep.
And Pat was at UCSD, so I applied to UCSD. I think I wanted to go to Stanford to CSLI, but it turned out that Stanford lost my graduate application recommendation letters. So by the time they realized what had happened and admitted me, they had already given away all their money. So I was accepted with no funding, whereas at San Diego I had a scholarship. And so I went there. And it was great.
Yeah, so I can see you've done, you chose to do both masters in philosophy and masters in neuroscience and a PhD. So 2 masters and PhD. What was the decision there?
It wasn't really a decision. So the master's comes along for free once you do the relevant courses. So I signed up for a PhD program. I started out in the philosophy department, and then kind of along the way got the master's in philosophy, and at the same time was taking all the basic courses for the neuroscience major. So I got the master's in that as well. And then when it was time to write my dissertation, I had decided that I really wanted to do 2 PhDs since I'd done all the coursework. And the university would not allow me to do 2 PhDs, and they said you have to pick one. And I thought that I'd had enough, I'd gotten what I wanted to get out of the philosophy department in terms of taking the courses and everything, but I didn't feel like I had enough background doing experimental science, even though I had been doing work in labs along the way.
Sure.
And so I thought I would learn more by doing the neuroscience PhD and really learning the experimental stuff. And so I ended up switching departments, which was kind of trivial because I had done all the coursework anyway.
Oh, okay.
And so ultimately, my degree was in neuroscience. But even in my neuroscience PhD, I have an 80-page chapter on how all of the developmental neurobiology that I had been doing just showed Kant's view of the prerequisites for cognition to be correct. So
I'm sure this was very impressive to your neuroscience advisors.
Yeah, they said you can put whatever you want in that chapter. We'll skip that one. They cared about the other ones, but
of course, as long as you have
Pat
some
Kitcher
good.
So Pat Kitcher was my advisor on that chapter.
Oh, great! Yeah, this was it. Wait, is Pat or is this Philip or by Pat for short or?
Philip is
different
Pat Kitcher's husband.
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
so Patricia Kitcher was my advisor for
That's
that
right. Okay.
piece on Kant, which was very much, I think, in sort of along the lines of the book that she had just published on Kant from a very, I thought, cognitive science point of view.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I hadn't realized her work on that. So that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay. Well, wow, that's very impressive. And so, maybe could you give us a brief, sort of 1 minute summary of your of the dissertation of what the ideas were about?
So the dissertation was about how axons in the retina find their way to their targets in the brain, essentially. And it was actually a project that was, I think my advisor had suggested it as, well, I had a project in mind, and he said, before you do that project, why don't you do this little project in order to, get familiar with these techniques and stuff. And I think he very well knew that little project was an entire dissertation project that I would never have agreed to do if he had said to do it, because it wasn't, I thought, particularly interesting to somebody interested in systems, neuroscience, and behavior. It was very low level. So I found molecules that help guide axons to their targets and form topographic maps and stuff like that. So it was important work, but not addressing any of the questions that I cared about. So ultimately, I thought unfulfilling.
But necessary to be completed, and obviously,
right?
Yeah. Sounds.
As my dad said, the biggest virtue a dissertation can have is being finished. So.
That's. I've been told that over and over again, and I believe it. I believe it. Well, okay. So, you come away with having done some great experimental work, both in neuroscience and cognitive science. And so, what was next for you on your academic journey?
So, while I was doing my dissertation, functional MRI was invented, and I discovered it in I actually don't remember how I discovered it, but I decided this is what I need to learn. So I actually got a few people in the medical school who were doing some functional MRI to offer a course on it, and that was great. I learned a lot working with them, designing the course. And
you guys had I imagine the UCSD had like one fMRI machine.
They had a scanner in the hospital. That was there was no research scanner at the time.
Okay.
But I tracked down the head of MR physics, and he was actually really interested in fMRI, and so we put together a course, and then I applied for postdocs doing functional MRI and went to work with Steve Peterson at Washington University.
Oh, great. How was that?
That was terrific. It was, great.
Fantastic.
Great lab and great people. And I did a little bit of work, more, sort of benchmarking kind of work in fMRI, but WashU was known for PET studies, and I did some PET studies of cognition. And
so, I mean, at the time, really working, being employed more so as a cognitive scientist, neuroscientist, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Okay. And so, doing your postdoc then, what was next?
I guess doing the postdoc, I had this feeling that it was interesting. I certainly thought it was interesting, but I also found a lot of the work a little tedious, and felt like I was narrowing in too much on tiny questions and was kind of missing the broader view that philosophy gave me. And I thought that perhaps I would be happier looking at things more broadly. And I had the opportunity to apply for a job as an editor of the journal Neuron.
Oh, yeah.
And that seemed interesting and challenging. And Neuron, up to that time, had really been a low-level cellular molecular journal, but they were interested in expanding to systems neuroscience. And so that was my mandate. And I think I, in my tenure there, accomplished that. So now it really is a very broad-ranging journal.
So as working as a senior editor, what exactly does this entail? So this is not necessarily, this is within academia, but not a specifically academic position. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's within academia. I was definitely working for a
publisher
corporation, and I discovered that I do not like working for people. I don't like punching the clock, and I don't necessarily like having a boss. But I really enjoyed interacting with the scientists and going to meetings and learning about all sorts of cutting-edge science that I didn't know about. So I think that experience gave me a breadth that I wouldn't otherwise have. And I did a lot of writing because there was a lot of front matter review material and things like that I was in charge of, and often whoever was writing it turned out not to be a very good writer, so I would rewrite lots and lots of things. And
did you think your time working there has helped you at all, or I guess informed the way in which you do science and or philosophy of science?
I think so. I mean, I'm not sure that I would say that it was an experience that taught me things that I could not have learned any other way, but I think I have a good sense of how to write a paper, how to write a science paper. I have a good sense of what significant science is as opposed to sort of incremental science. And I have a much broader grasp of science than many people get, I think, because you tend to really focus down when you're a grad student and a postdoc. So I'm sure those things have helped, but I'm not sure that you have to be a journal editor in order to learn those things.
Sure. So working here, I notice there. I don't want to skip ahead too much, but it seems like following this, you had decided to go off to MIT and go on to a PhD in specifically philosophy. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess I realized that even as a neuron editor, I wasn't doing things, I wasn't looking at the questions as broadly as I wanted to. And I also felt that despite the fact that every single issue of the journal had my mark on it because I wrote so much of it or edited so much of it or chose what ended up in it, I didn't feel like the work was mine. I felt more like I was facilitating other people's work. And so those things convinced me that I wanted to go back to academia. And I was a little torn about whether to go back and do a postdoc in neuroimaging. So I could have gone and worked with Nancy Canwisher, which I'm sure would have been a fantastic experience.
Sure.
Or to go back to philosophy. And I guess I ultimately opted for philosophy. Not really sure why, but I only applied to programs and I only applied to basically Harvard and MIT because I was tied to Boston for personal
Might as well
reasons.
shoot high and yeah, sure. Okay.
But when I got in, I decided to go, and it was a bit of a shock, frankly.
Yeah. So, I mean, were one of the reasons, after having this pretty kind of a very varied and unique career following your work at UC San Diego, was one of the reasons to go back in order to eventually work or to achieve some sort of a tenured position in philosophy?
Yeah. So I had discovered around the same time I was thinking of going to work for Neuron, I thought maybe I'll just apply for philosophy jobs, and I did, and I didn't get a single interview, and I was completely perplexed. I thought, how is it possible that nobody wants to interview me? And Pat Kitcher said to me, well, frankly, Adina, without a PhD, doesn't matter what you've written, doesn't matter what you've done, what matters,
What matters, yeah.
People won't even look beyond the fact that you don't have a PhD when it comes to the job market. And now I realize, having been on searches, why that is the case. And so I knew that if I did ultimately want to work as a philosopher, I had to get the PhD. So, in fact, I had gotten very bad advice, or no one had advised me, I maybe should say.
Sure.
But it is very possible and almost, I would say, easy to get a postdoc in neuroscience if you have a philosophy PhD and some experience working in a lab, whereas it is virtually impossible to get a job in philosophy or even a postdoc in philosophy. Less impossible in that case, but it's very unlikely you're going to get anything in philosophy if your degree is in the sciences and not in philosophy. So I think there's a flexibility in one direction and not the other, and unfortunately, I didn't know that. So it turned out I really did have to go back and get a PhD in philosophy. And I thought it was going to be easy, but I very quickly discovered that the kind of philosophy that I'd learned at San Diego was a very idiosyncratic slice of philosophy, and that I virtually knew nothing about the way most of America does philosophy.
Yeah, so
MIT turned out to be very challenging and eye-opening for me, and I learned a lot of important things there.
So maybe you could just a second. I know we're kind of getting shorter on time here for this particular interview, but what was specific? What do you mean by that specifically in terms of the way most folks do philosophy? I think I have an idea, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, at UCSD, the place was so suffused with things like connectionism and looking at things from a very naturalistic perspective.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of possible worlds, very basic things in analytic philosophy I had never encountered. And MIT was very much, standard hardcore analytic philosophy. And so there was this whole literature I didn't know, and then and skills, modal logic, all
Sure.
kinds of stuff that had never even been on the horizon when I was at UCSD. And so I had sort of expected I would sail through and, know everything already. And in fact, I knew nothing. And most of my classmates were far better at it than I was, at least for the first year or so. But it was a great education.
Now, do you think, are you, it sounds like you're pretty grateful for this new more hardcore analytical philosophy turn. Do you think it's been helpful in terms of the way in which you do philosophy of science now?
Oh yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. I have, conceptual tools available that I just didn't have before. And I might say the same thing about the stuff that I learned at UCSD.
Sure.
I still think that way too. But I think those things are much more, if you're not on the left coast, as they say, those things just aren't as important.
We were discussing, your time at MIT and how that has informed, or at least like developing the conceptual tools there, as well as some of the tools at UCSD and how that can inform your doing your work in philosophy of science today. So I suppose, once you finished and completed your degree at MIT, what was next for you?
So I applied for jobs and was very lucky to get this job at Dartmouth.
How did that come about?
Well, I guess I had known Mike Gazzaniga since I had gone to his brain camp.
You went to his brain camp?
Yeah, in 1990.
Oh, wow.
So I had known him for a while, and I don't know how it came about, but I applied, and they interviewed me, and I turned out to be their second choice candidate. And although I had other offers, I really wasn't nearly as interested in them.
Oh, sure.
And so I was waiting to see whether the first choice candidate would take a different job, and ultimately he didn't. But then Mike, I guess the department went to Mike and said, well, we actually have this other person who we really like. Can we have two positions instead of one? And he made it possible.
Fantastic.
So that was great. So I actually came in half in philosophy and half in this master's program to teach a track in cognitive science.
Oh, cool.
And that program folded as soon as Mike left the deanery, but Dartmouth basically just changed my appointment to be fully in philosophy. So, and now it looks like they might change it again to be partially in this new cognitive science program I'm running. So these things are pretty fungible, I think.
Yeah. So, and for the listeners who might not have known too much about Dartmouth and what it offers in terms of philosophy of science, in terms of cognitive science, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on at Dartmouth?
Well, Dartmouth, it's a primarily undergraduate institution. So the philosophy department has no graduate program, but the science departments do. And Dartmouth has a very long history at the forefront of cognitive neuroscience. So Mike Gazzaniga was here for a long time. He was essentially the creator or popularizer of cognitive neuroscience, and we have a very strong psychology and brain sciences department. I think we were the first university to have a scanner in the psychology building purely for research purposes.
And for those who don't know of Gazzaniga's work, Gazzaniga was a co-author on the split brain initial split brain studies.
Yes, yeah. He's I would say a big name in cognitive neuroscience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you're in cognitive neuroscience, you absolutely know. But it's possible. Yeah, some of our listeners in philosophy might not be aware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Gazzaniga was dean of the faculty when I arrived, and there was quite a lot of activity in cognitive neuroscience. I wouldn't say that there was a lot of ties between the psych and brain sciences department and other departments, but that's something that we're working on. And right now I've basically redesigned the cognitive science program and instituted a new curriculum, and we're actually hiring somebody this year in that program, and hope that it grows into something stronger that really serves as a hub that connects the psych and brain sciences people who are interested in issues in cognitive science with people across the university, from computer science, linguistics, philosophy, anthropology, etc.
Wow!
So that's the hope.
So will this be? I'm sorry. Will this be like a program of some kind that?
Yeah, so it's a program with a major, and it will have some faculty that are also affiliated with other departments, and whether in the future it has a graduate component, who knows? That's not something I'm worrying about right now, but it's a possibility.
Okay. So, and I'm curious, as you've done quite a bit of great work in cognitive science and in philosophy of cognitive science, are there a couple works that you've done while at Dartmouth that you would like to share, or a couple, maybe one or two papers that you're particularly proud of?
Well, let's see. That's
Well, I see. So yeah, I have your.
I mean, I know which ones are my most, most widely read papers. They're not necessarily the ones that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, those are two different things for sure.
Yeah.
I suppose if you had to select one paper to share with someone, which one might it be?
Someone in philosophy?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or
philosophy of science.
Boy. Maybe saving subtraction, which was in BJPS.
Oh yeah. Is that, and that's coming out?
No, that's been. I
It's
can't
been out.
remember
I'm sorry.
when
Okay.
it was, but.
I'm looking at a very outdated CV. I apologize.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I think my CV was about 6 years out of date, the one online. So
understandable.
I recently posted a new CV, like last week.
Oh, great!
Because I realized that mine was 6 years out of date. But anyway, that's a very standard philosophy of science paper responding to some criticisms about neuroimaging. So much of the work I've done in philosophy of neuroscience has been about neuroimaging, and what it can tell us and what it can't tell us. So I guess that's one of them that I quite like.
So you mentioned So is what if you had to give a very concise response, what can it tell us and what can't it tell us?
Well, I think in a series of papers, I argue that it can tell us very important things, in contrast to claims by certain psychologists who argue that it can't tell us anything. And then I also don't think it can tell us as much as many of the big fans of imaging say it can tell us. So I think there are real limits to what it can tell us. But nonetheless, the fact that it's a technique that can get whole brain data non-invasively from people who are actually awake and behaving in some respects anyway, it's an invaluable tool. So I guess it's always a little less interesting to be a moderate than an extremist, but I am a moderate in these things, but I think that they're good arguments for being so.
Absolutely. I know, as my advisor would always say, it's taking the boring middle position, but it's always, to be honest, it's often the most attractive.
Yeah, well, if you care about truth.
It's not just
the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's.
But I have a paper called "Don't Panic," which is a paper about why you should be a compatibilist, and how much you can get out of compatibilism. It's one of my favorites in a sense. It was the one I think that was most difficult for me to write. And so, I think of all my papers, it is the one that I found the hardest. And in some sense, I felt most proud of finishing. But
so what was challenging about this particular paper?
Well, I don't know. I guess, it's addressing a pretty difficult problem, like how you get agency, how you preserve agency in a compatibilist framework, and it's a story for how you get diachronic agency. I'm not 100% convinced that it works, but I felt like I struggled, and it at least got to a point where I wasn't ashamed of it, so I published it. But, I think it was the struggle that makes that one more meaningful to me than
absolutely
some of the others that I've written.
And are there any particular papers or projects that you're excited about now?
Well, I have dreams of writing a book on philosophy of neuroimaging.
Okay.
But my reality is not sure it's compatible with that. So when I can next get time off from teaching and administration, that's what I want to spend my time doing. But I've found my plate is pretty full with the other things that my job and my life have thrown at me. So
absolutely. Well, yeah. You've mentioned that. I imagine at Dartmouth is the teaching's a little bit heavier there.
Yeah, I think the teaching is heavy. It's our terms are compressed. Our students are demanding. and we take the teaching very seriously. So it's very time consuming, and running this program has been very time consuming. So, and I've got a 4-year-old who is also pretty demanding.
Oh, I bet.
But yeah, he keeps me grounded.
Absolutely. Yeah. I imagine, will he want to be a physicist too? I don't know.
I am guessing an engineer, but who knows?
Is he already building things, playing with trains? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Of course, as 4-year-olds do.
If he can take it apart, it's fascinating.
Yeah. So I couldn't help but also notice, I just opened up your new CV, that you happen to go to law school for a little.
Yes, I did.
That's so okay. Yes. So I'm, as someone who's very passionate about education and learning, this is I think this is fascinating and great, and really telling of someone who can continue to be successful in academia while still seeking higher education. So what was the decision here?
Well, I was very interested in how neuroscience would or could or shouldn't affect the law, and was fortunate enough to get a grant to cover all the expenses for a year of law school. So the Mellon Foundation, they have something called the New Directions Fellowship, where they will fund you to study in a field outside of your own. And so I spent a year as a first-year law student, and it was really fascinating. It was great, and I think it gave me a much better feel for the way the law works, and I think it has tempered my view about both whether neuroscience can or should affect the law or how much, but I think it's certain to me that it will, in some sense, affect the law, but I do think that it will be a much more moderate effect than some people think. Just because of the way the law is and works, and the goals that it has or that we have for it. So I don't think that it will be purely driven by scientific truth and theory.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So what do you believe it will be driven by?
Well, I mean, it's driven by many pragmatic considerations,
sure.
And I think that puts real constraints on how much change we're going to see as a function of developments in science.
Yeah.
But it was really fun to be a student again.
No, absolutely, yeah. Well, and I've also heard the first year of law school is the most, I suppose, the most course heavy. It's really where a lot of the learning takes place.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's not clear to me that I would have gotten twice as much out of another year, out of 2 years as opposed to one. So I think I got the best of it. I'm not opposed to doing more in the future, but I did sort of feel like, given that the time I have left on this planet is limited, it's not clear to me that another year of law school is preferable to a year of doing my own research in philosophy and neuroscience. So, I think the fact that we all have to make choices and set our priorities has become much more obvious to me in the last few years.
Well,
so
I also
trying to be a little bit more intentional in those things.
Yeah. Well, and I also like the this sort of the middle ground approach too, to even, finding a way yet still to be educated and get back to school, but obviously doing it in a way that is useful in one's career. I think that's really something.
Yeah.
So why don't we conclude the last question that I've been asking a lot of our guests, is to, sort of more holistic reflection on philosophy of science as it relates to other fields. What do you see as the greatest challenges for philosophy of science today?
I think they're more external challenges. I think it's become clear to me that Americans, in general, don't understand how science works, and that lack of understanding has very serious political and policy implications, and that maybe the hardest thing for philosophers of science to do is to go outside of the discipline and try to educate lay people in such a way that they understand both the benefits of science and its strengths, and also its weaknesses, but how those weaknesses are mitigated, or how to understand the language of science in such a way that you understand its significance without discounting it. When you talk about probabilities, what are you saying, and what kind of implications should that have for the way in which you think about practical decisions? And I think that science is actually in crisis right now, and maybe philosophers of science are best positioned to help alleviate that.
That's a really thoughtful position. What are there any action steps that philosophers of science or sympathizers, or if related to the field, could take?
Yeah, well, that is a great question, and I'm not sure I have the answer. I mean, I think writing pieces for general publications, for newspapers, that try to explain in non-technical language what the epistemology of science is, and how we should think about certain areas of science, and how we should think about language couched in probabilities, in ways that speak to people who don't have a background, would be really invaluable. I am a little bit pessimistic that any of the venues that might publish these things are venues that will reach the right kind of people. And to me, that's one of the scariest things, is that the information channels, I think, don't really exist, that would need to exist in order to get people on the same page.
We don't have a NOVA program for philosophy of science, or
right,
or just or more like public understanding of science. Something. I mean, we have some really great science programs in terms of astrophysics and the universe and things, but nothing with that approaches science by understanding its significance while also discussing its limitations. Honest and straightforwardly, given the concern with folks, also related to science denial and other things. There's a concern for some, I think, maybe of being so the honest, by explaining the limitations of science might be in some ways leaving the door open for not attentive listeners to take that as somehow indicative of science is not something we should study or something like that.
Right. So that's the problem, is conveying not just the limitations, but what those limitations really mean. The way in which science's limitations are sort of acknowledged and built into the process of science itself, and somehow undercutting the route for naysayers to draw the conclusions that they erroneously draw. So if there's a way to do that, and if there's a way to do it creatively so that you could actually get the attention of people, because unfortunately, most people don't actually want to hear about the theory. And, they're, even when they're happy to see the cool astrophysics program, you might not get them to tune in to maybe the little bit less glitzy theoretical stuff. And so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was going to say, I believe you're right. But then at the same time, folks are generally interested in the neuroimaging and the law tools. And there seem to be some areas that people can kind of start to see, I could see how there might be limits to certain, maybe it's more like in terms of technology base and what that can say. So in terms of epistemic claims related to industrialized science and technology-based science. So, so those are things that people can start to bridge, like lay people, like folks that aren't really in philosophy of science can start to bridge into. But I think you're generally right that there are certain, really maybe bigger picture, more abstract discussions of science. It's not, people aren't going to tune in, or people have yet to tune in as much.
Right. So I would say the challenge is to figure out how to reach them. That to me is the biggest challenge. And I'm not sure I'm equipped to deal with that.
This is a good question. Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I'm sure there's folks in science policy or folks who study more of the interconnections between science and politics that might have another take on this. But I think you bring up some really good points, and I'm very interested to see how things go in a little bit, and then maybe and perhaps how philosophers of science can make an impact, if any.
Yep.
All right, Adina. Well, thank you so much for going over. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to chat. I really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or say on the podcast?
I'm sure there will be as soon as I sign off.
I'm sure. Usually these are, opportunities if there's like any conferences coming up, or if there's programmed, just an opportunity to plug something.
Well, I would love to get a wonderful cognitive scientist to join the Dartmouth department, so I can put a plug in for looking for the job posting and
really? Okay. Yeah. I'll definitely know. So
apply to that.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely keep that in mind. There are plenty of folks from the cognitive science program at IU here that are doing some nice, really good experimental work, who I'm sure might be interested. Or I'm not sure if you guys are looking for junior faculty or, additional faculty.
It's an open position. So, we're going to see who applies and go from there.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Adina. Good luck getting ready for the start of the fall term.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.